When you picture sleep in the time of Jesus, what do you see? A quiet room? A simple bed? Perhaps a family resting peacefully after prayer? That image is wrong. Sleep in 30 AD Galilee was not rest as we understand it. It was not private. It was not quiet. It was not even particularly safe. It was bodies pressed together on a dirt floor. It was the sound of animals shifting in the dark below you. It was smoke residue in your lungs from a cooking fire that never fully cleared. It was cold that penetrated wool cloaks in winter, heat that drove families onto rooftops in summer, and darkness so complete that a single clay lamp, if you could afford the oil, barely illuminated the face of the person sleeping an arm's length away. There were no bedrooms, no mattresses, no doors that closed for privacy, no silence. What did night actually mean when you had no glass in your windows, no separation between yourself and your livestock, and no guarantee that sunrise would bring anything but more labor? Stay until the end, because understanding how people slept reveals how they survived and what it cost them. To understand sleep in Galilee, we must first understand darkness. Not the darkness of a modern bedroom with street lights bleeding through curtains. Not the darkness of a power outage when you still have a phone screen. Darkness as an absolute condition. When the sun set over the Galilean hills, night did not arrive gradually. It fell. Within an hour of sunset, the world outside your home became effectively impassable without a lamp or torch. The streets of villages like Capernaum or Nazareth had no illumination, no torches at crossroads, no lanterns hung by doorways. Moonlight was the only public light source. On nights when the moon was new or hidden by clouds, the darkness was so complete that travelers caught outside would simply stop and wait until dawn rather than risk a fall, an animal, or losing the path entirely. Inside the typical Galilean home, a single-room structure of stacked fieldstone with a packed dirt floor, the situation was barely better. If a family could afford it, they burned olive oil in a small clay lamp. Not lamps, plural. One lamp. The vessel itself was roughly the size of a closed fist, with a small reservoir for oil and a channel for a wick made of twisted flax. The light it produced was weak, flickering. It illuminated perhaps 3 feet in radius with any usefulness. Enough to see faces, not enough to work by. And olive oil was expensive, precious. It was food, medicine, and fuel all at once. Burning it for light was a calculated decision. Many families simply did not. They rose with the sun, worked until it set, ate their evening meal in twilight, and then lay down in complete darkness. This was not a metaphor. This was the nightly reality for most of the people Jesus walked among. Darkness was not an inconvenience. It was a governing force. It dictated when you stopped working, when you lay down, when you stayed inside. The night was not your time. It belonged to something else. There was no such thing as a bedroom, not in the sense of a separate space where sleep happened in isolation. Not for farmers, laborers, fishermen, or their families. Not for the vast majority of people living in Galilee in 30 AD. The single-room home was not divided. It was shared, entirely. A typical peasant house measured roughly 15 by 20 feet. One room, 4 walls, a dirt floor, sometimes covered with reed mats if the family had the resources. At one end, a slightly elevated platform of packed earth or stone, perhaps a foot high, where the family slept. At the other end, a lower section where the animals stayed at night. Yes, the animals. Not in a separate barn, not outside. Inside. A donkey, perhaps. A few goats, sometimes chickens. They were brought in each evening, not out of affection, but out of necessity. Theft was common. Predators were real. Livestock represented survival. You did not leave survival outside, so the family slept on one level. The animals occupied the other, separated by a step, nothing more. In that elevated sleeping area, bodies arranged themselves by function and warmth. Parents near the center, children clustered close, grandparents, if they were still alive, given a place near the wall. Infants swaddled and tucked between adults. There was no privacy, no separation, no individual sleeping spaces. If you were a child in this world, you did not fall asleep alone in a quiet room. You fell asleep to the sound of your father's breathing, your mother's whispered prayers, your siblings' cough, the rustle of your grandfather shifting his weight, and below you the rhythmic shuffle of the donkey, the bleat of a goat, the scratch of a chicken settling into straw. This was not dysfunction. This was design. This was warmth. This was security. This was how you survived winter cold and summer fear. But it was not rest as we imagine it. It was proximity, necessity. The shared floor of bodies that made night endurable. What did they sleep on? Not beds, not frames, not anything resembling the furniture we associate with rest. The sleeping surface was the ground itself, packed earth, sometimes covered with woven reed mats if the family had means. More often, loose straw scattered across the raised platform. That was the mattress. The pillow was a folded garment, or a stone, or nothing. Archaeological excavations of first-century Galilean homes reveal no evidence of bed frames in peasant dwellings, no wood construction designed for sleeping. The elevated platform was architectural, not furnished. You lay directly on it. The blanket was your outer cloak. This is not incidental. Jewish law explicitly forbade taking a man's cloak as collateral overnight. Exodus 22:26-27 commands that if you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you must return it before sunset. For that is his only covering. In what else shall he sleep? That legal protection existed because the cloak was the blanket. It was wool, thick enough to block wind, heavy enough to retain body heat. During the day, you wore it. At night, you wrapped yourself in it. It was the single textile barrier between your body and the cold. Without it, you did not sleep. You endured. Families with multiple children shared cloaks. Infants were swaddled, not for comfort, but for warmth and to prevent them from moving into dangerous positions during the night. Older children pressed together under a single covering. This is why the loss of a cloak was catastrophic. This is why the law protected it. Not because it was valuable in trade, but because its absence meant suffering through the night. The sleeping mat, when it existed, was woven from reeds or rushes gathered near water sources. It provided a thin layer between body and dirt. It could be rolled up during the day to create more floor space. It absorbed moisture. It harbored insects. It was not comfortable. It was functional. Sleep was not about comfort. It was about warmth, proximity, and making it until morning. Night was not silent. The modern expectation of sleep, a quiet room, a closed door, the hum of climate control, did not exist. The Galilean night was a tapestry of noise, animal presence, and human sound bleeding through walls too thin to contain it. From below, the animals provided constant accompaniment. The donkey shifted its weight, hooves scraping packed earth. Goats bleated at intervals, reacting to sounds outside, or simply to discomfort. Chickens rustled in their straw, clucking softly. These were not occasional disruptions. They were the baseline soundtrack. The walls themselves offered no acoustic barrier. Constructed from stacked field stone with mud mortar, often less than a foot thick, they transmitted everything. Your neighbor's argument, a child's midnight crying 3 houses down, a man's cough, a woman singing to calm an infant. The sounds of intimacy, conflict, illness, and prayer, all of it bled through stone. Dogs barked through the village at any disturbance, a fox near the chicken coops, a stranger on the road, another dog barking. The chain reaction could last for minutes, echoing across the hillside settlement. Above you, the roof itself was alive. Thatch and mud-packed branches harbored mice, insects, small birds. You could hear them moving, scratching. The rustle was constant in certain seasons. Occasionally, something larger, a rat, a snake seeking warmth, made its presence known. This was not a failure of construction. This was the reality of available materials and the impossibility of sealing a structure against the living world. If you were sick, everyone knew. If your child woke screaming from fever, the neighbors heard. If you fought with your spouse, it was public knowledge by morning. Sleep happened not in isolation, but in community. Forced, involuntary community. You closed your eyes to noise. You woke to noise. Rest was not the absence of disturbance. It was learning to sleep despite it. Temperature did not negotiate. In winter, Galilean nights dropped to near freezing. The hill country around Nazareth, elevated above sea level, saw frost. Capernaum, on the shores of the lake, fared slightly better. But cold penetrated stone walls as though they were not there. There was no heating system, no fireplace with a chimney, no stove. The cooking fire, built in a shallow pit or on a raised clay platform during the day, was extinguished or reduced to embers by nighttime. Smoke had to escape through the doorway or gaps in the roof. Keeping a fire burning through the night meant suffocating in smoke. So it went out. What remained was body heat, wool cloaks, proximity. Families pressed together on the sleeping platform not out of affection, but out of thermal necessity. Infants tucked between adults, children layered against parents. The animals below provided secondary warmth, their body heat rising through the single-room space. Still, it was cold. Cold enough that illness spiked in winter months. Cold enough that the poorest families, those with threadbare cloaks or too few bodies to share warmth, simply suffered until dawn. In summer, the problem inverted. Galilee in July and August became an oven. Daytime temperatures exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Stone walls absorbed heat. The single-room house, sealed against winter wind, trapped it. By nightfall, the interior remained stifling, airless, The packed bodies that provided winter warmth became unbearable. So families moved. They climbed to the roof, the flat mud and thatch surface, accessed by an exterior stone stairway, became the summer sleeping platform. Here at least air moved. Here the heat radiated upward into open sky rather than pressing down. But this introduced new problems. No walls meant no protection from insects. Mosquitoes bred in standing water near villages. Fleas thrived in the straw and animal dung below. Sleeping on the roof meant exposure. It also meant vulnerability. What little privacy existed inside vanished entirely on the roof. Neighbors on their own rooftops were visible. Sounds carried farther. The boundary between family and community dissolved further. Weather added another layer of risk. Summer rainstorms, though rare, could arrive suddenly. A family sleeping on the roof had minutes to gather their mats and cloaks and retreat inside before being soaked. There was no thermostat, no adjustment, no control. You endured the cold, or you endured the heat. Rest happened in whatever conditions the season imposed. Someone was always awake. Sleep was not a collective surrender to night. It was not 8 uninterrupted hours of household silence. In every village, in every home, someone remained conscious, not by choice, but by necessity. Shepherds did not sleep, or rather, they slept in fragments, in shifts, never fully. The flocks bedded down in makeshift stone enclosures on hillsides beyond the village. Sheep were vulnerable. Wolves hunted at night. Jackals circled. Thieves operated under cover of darkness. So shepherds stayed awake. They walked the perimeter. They counted heads by moonlight. They listened for the sound of panicked bleating that meant something had breached the fold. When exhaustion became unbearable, they slept in turns, one man watching while another collapsed for an hour, maybe 2. Then they switched. This was not occasional. This was every night. For months during lambing season, when flocks were moved to pasture, fishermen worked the night. The Sea of Galilee's fish moved in patterns tied to temperature and light. Certain species fed near the surface after sunset. Night fishing was not preference, it was strategy. Men like Peter and Andrew rowed out in wooden boats as twilight faded. They cast nets by moonlight. They hauled them in by feel and rhythm. They worked until the first pre-dawn light, then rowed back to shore to sort the catch and repair nets before the day's heat made the work unbearable. They did not go home and sleep 8 hours. They slept briefly. In the afternoon heat when fishing was impossible. In fragments, mothers did not rest. Infants did not observe schedules. A newborn woke every 2 hours to nurse. A sick child spiked fever in the night and needed water, cool compresses, whispered comfort. Older children had nightmares. Toddlers wet their sleeping mats. There was no separate nursery, no other room to retreat to. The mother rose from the shared sleeping platform, tended the child within arm's reach of her husband and other children, then lay back down. If illness struck, and it often did, she might not sleep at all. She stayed awake through the night, monitoring breathing, offering sips of water, praying. The elderly slept poorly. Pain kept them awake. Joints stiffened by decades of labor ached on hard surfaces. Bladders weakened by age required multiple trips outside during the night. A journey that meant navigating the dark room, stepping carefully around sleeping children, moving past the animals, and going out into the cold or heat. Some simply lay awake. too uncomfortable to sleep, too tired to do anything else. Work did not wait for rest. Bakers rose before dawn to begin kneading dough so bread could bake in the cool morning before heat made the work unbearable. Farmers needed to reach fields by first light. Laborers hired for the day gathered at the village gate at sunrise. If you were not there, you were not chosen. Sleep was not a right. It was not guaranteed. It was stolen in whatever moments labor and biology allowed. The night shift was not an occupation. It was a condition of survival. Sickness at night was terror without name. A child's fever spiked after dark. The body burned. The skin dried. The breathing quickened into shallow gasps. Thus, mother pressed a cool cloth to the forehead. Water drawn from the jar in the corner, rationed because the well was outside, and night made the journey dangerous. She did not know what caused the fever. No one did. There was no understanding of bacteria, no concept of virus or infection. Illness came from somewhere else. Bad air, foul vapors rising from stagnant water. The evil eye of a jealous neighbor, demons, especially demons. The darkness itself was suspect. Night was when evil moved, when unclean spirits wandered, when the boundary between the seen world and the unseen thinned. This was not superstition in the sense of baseless fear. This was the explanatory framework that existed in the absence of microbiology. When your child convulsed in the night, when wounds festered despite washing, when fever took a healthy person in 3 days, something was responsible. You named what you could not see: the demoniac who lived among the tombs, the man possessed by legion. These were not metaphors. They were diagnoses. Epilepsy was attributed to spirits. Delirium from infection looked like possession. The thrashing, the incoherent speech, the eyes that did not recognize family. What else could explain it? And at night, when the single clay lamp barely pushed back the darkness, when the sick person's breathing grew labored and strange, fear compounded. You could not call a doctor. Physicians existed, but they served the wealthy. A peasant family had access to the village healer at best, an elder woman who knew which herbs reduced fever, which poultices drew infection. But she was not coming in the night, not unless the illness was dire enough to justify waking her, bringing her through dark streets. So you waited, you prayed, you recited the Shema in the dark. You watched. If the fever broke by morning, it was mercy. If it did not, you prepared for loss. Night illness carried psychological weight that daylight sickness did not. The isolation, the helplessness, the fear that you were watching someone die and could do nothing. The darkness made suffering worse. It removed the comfort of sight. You could hear the labored breathing, feel the heat radiating from skin, but you could not see clearly, could not assess, could not even be certain the person was still conscious. This is why morning mattered. Sunrise did not cure, but it broke the grip of night's terror. It allowed you to see, to evaluate, to seek help if the person still lived. The demons of darkness were not only theological, they were experiential, born from the reality of suffering without knowledge, in isolation, under conditions that amplified every fear. Morning did not arrive gently. There was no slow transition from sleep to wakefulness. No alarm clock you could silence for 10 more minutes. No gradual adjustment. You woke because biology demanded it, because animals needed feeding, because bread had to be baked before the heat made the work unbearable, because the day's labor began at first light, and if you were not ready, you did not eat. The rooster crowed, not as a quaint rural sound, but as a jarring, insistent announcement that night had ended. Other roosters answered across the village. The donkey below shifted and brayed. Goats bleated for release to pasture. The infant woke and cried. The father rose first, stepping carefully over sleeping children. The mother nursed the baby one more time before the day consumed her. Rest was not luxury. It was survival. You slept enough to function, nothing more. Night in first-century Galilee was not rest. It was endurance. No beds, no privacy, no silence, no control over cold or heat. Just bodies pressed together on straw and dirt, animals shuffling below, sickness without remedy, and darkness so complete a single lamp barely mattered. Sleep was not about comfort. It was about surviving until dawn. The people of Jesus' world did not get a good night's sleep. They endured the night with wool cloaks as blankets, shared floors as beds, and labor waiting at first light. Understanding this changes how we read Scripture. When Jesus had nowhere to lay his head, this was the norm he walked away from. When he calmed a storm at night, he broke the terror of helpless darkness. This was their reality. Every night, without exception.